get that because the live stream, who knows what's going on with Zoom and Facebook, but we're not going to wait for them anymore. And we're going to say our blessing for learning, which is Baruch Atah
Adonai,
Melech Haolam
Asher Shanu,
B'tzivunu La'asok
Zok,
Torah.
Divrei Torah.
Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctifies us with commandments and commands us to engage in words of Torah. And the words of Torah today are slightly political. I am hoping that they might be, let's call it a little bit cleansing in the wake of last night. I don't know. I don't want to make any presumptions about our political leanings as a group, but I think regardless of party or affiliation, if you watched the debate last night, I can only say that the level of citizenship and participation by those in the highest parts of our government are definitely at an all-time low in my lifetime or in my understanding of reported history, at least going back to when we used to have duels to decide things. I have to say that I am glad my son watched it for the sake of him being able to see it, and horrified that he had to see it, that we've gotten to that point. So, but in any event, our talk today is on a totally related topic, and I think much more hopeful. So I'm going to share our screen with this piece from the opening of Rabbi Dennis Ross's book, and he will explain to all of us who he is through this. So this is Rabbi Dennis Ross. It's not a new book, or not a new book, and he's been doing this type of stuff for a while. This book came out in 2012. I even met him, and he inscribed the book to me, so that was nice. And so you can see, to Jonathan, with best wishes, Dennis. So this is All Politics is Religion, Speaking Faith to the Media, Policymakers, and Community. And the presumption here, as it were, is we have this problem in the religious world, that somehow or another, if we are supposed to do, if we're supposed to say something about politics, then we're crossing a line, right? We have this the wall between church and state. And yet, our values have political implications. Who we are as people says something about who we are politically. And the word politics, which gets trashed pretty severely in public nowadays, is in fact meant to be the way by which we take our will and put it into place in the public. The way by which we as a community decide on what we do in public. So it turns out that there may be a way to mix politics and religion. So we're going to look at least his first two sections here, his preface, Preaching to the Choir, and his introduction, How I Became an Advocate. And it's hopefully will be interesting. And please, as always, feel free to interrupt me and stop me with questions as we go, because we like that. So here we start. Hello, Bobby, and hello, Ruth. Thank you for joining us. Nice to see you both. And so here we start, Preaching to the Choir. And he says, Dennis Ross says, it happens to me all the time. I had just finished speaking at a forum in downstate New York. We agree with you, Rabbi, I heard from the audience, but you're preaching to the choir, spinning your wheels. Give your speech upstate. They need your voice up there. For those of you who know anything about New York, downstate is usually a euphemism for the New York City area, and upstate is everywhere else. If you are a New Yorker, upstate is anything from the Yonkers farther north, which is the majority of the state of New York, which is roughly the size of the state of France. So it's a lot of area and a lot of different culture. One of the things that's very interesting about New York is its regionalism is very different. Northern New York is much closer in attitude to the world to Vermont. And Western New York, where Michael and Bobby and Ruth and I all live, is much closer in attitude. And Linda, I think, yes, Linda, you're also here, is much closer in attitude towards Cleveland. We are more like Midwesterners here in Western New York than we are like New Yorkers. So in any event, several months later, I found myself upstate facing a similar audience and a similar response. "We're with you, Rabbi," I heard, "but you're preaching to the choir, trying to convince the converted. You should speak downstate. Send this message to them." Here's my dilemma. If downstate says go upstate and upstate says go downstate, where should I speak? In the middle? This is what I said. "I'm glad you are with me, but we have to preach to the choir because this choir isn't being heard. This choir has to stand up and get really, really loud. This choir has to sing." And I feel, when I read this, I feel like this is something that we have all been saying for a while, which is that many of us are tired of hearing the same message from our leaders and feel like something should happen already. And I think what's fascinating about that is the message from our leaders is our message, and we need to take it out of the building. We need to go and act on it. We need to transform not merely by listening, but by doing. And I think when he says the choir needs to sing, that's kind of what he's talking about. Preaching to the choir, spinning your wheels, preaching to the converted. I understand the frustration of my audience. I know what it feels like to sit through that sermon, the one that tells me what I already believe. I might learn something, but once the sermon and service are over, I head home and nothing's different. The world stays the same. Go preach to the other choir, I hear, the one that needs to change. Go convince them. The people who want to ban stem cell research and deport immigrants, go show them the errors of their ways. And God only knows, this is 8 years ago when he wrote this book, how much more we are there now. It is hard to imagine 2020 in the minds of our 2012 selves. I don't know where all of you were in 2012. I was a lot closer to Banjo Bob in 2012 than I am now, because in 2012, I was serving the congregation of Charlotte, North Carolina called Temple Bethel. It is hard to imagine that we were still talking about stem cell research and deporting immigrants, and those were the big issues. But it's easy to imagine people saying, "I'm already in the right place on this. Go tell somebody else. You're telling me the thing that I already buy into 100%. Go tell those other people who are not thinking correctly yet." And this, we know, has not gotten us anywhere. With 8 years of hindsight, we can say, wow, what did I not accomplish in the last 8 years? To whom did I not speak? Whom did I not listen to that might have made a difference? What action could I have taken that might have done more? And so we're really there now. How do I transform my choir listening into going and singing instead? So Rabbi Ross continues, "My experience teaching that preaching to the other preaching to the other choir accomplishes even less. Most people are fixed in their opinions, no matter how good a speech I or anyone else delivers. It's as if our attitudes about social issues are hardwired, set by instinct. So I went back to my own choir to preach. I talked about the pressing need for this choir to stand up and sing, and thank God, more and more of us are coming forward each day. I wrote All Politics is Religion, Speaking Faith to the Media, Policymakers, and Community, to give voice to religious perspectives, supporting marriage, equality, access to contraception, sex education, and abortion care, for instance, that all too often go unheard, if not unsung. I have strong feelings about these issues, but you don't have to agree with me to get something out of this book. People of all backgrounds and persuasions have a lot to gain here. Of course, I want the world to be a better place than it is, and we can start by using respectful, dignified, and honest dialogue that avoids personal attack and political ridicule. The moral and spiritual future of the nation is at stake. People of all faiths can find something valuable about religious communication in these pages. So, boy.
Did you hear the debates last night? I mean, I'm sorry, Rabbi, but you're reading this and it was hideous. Just hideous. He was, well.
So I did start off by saying we are in a very different place than we were in 2012. That whatever we think about the debate last night, it was definitely the ringing of the death knell, another death knell of American civilization.
Yes.
But this quote here that he offers us, the moral and spiritual future of the nation is at stake. And trust me, I knew that we were going to talk about the debate last night, today. I didn't think we were going to get out of that, is so very true. And if it was true in 2012, when he wrote this, how much more true is it this morning? What we have seen is a total breakdown of public morality, a total breakdown of standards of civility. The conversation on Twitter last night among Jews on Twitter, a Jewish group of Jewish Democrats had been attacked by Jewish Republicans for claiming that we were on the cusp of fascism prior to the debate last night. It seems hard to argue otherwise. Our sitting president of the United States told a bona fide neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic, organized hate group last night to wait in the wings, to wait, watch and wait, and demanded that his people watch the polls. Those two things alone, not to mention the fact that a major party candidate called the sitting president of the United States a clown.
Yes.
We hit an all-time low in civility last night.
Yes.
And our entire civilization is under attack. The idea that the chief executive, that the commander-in-chief, that the president who holds the same office as George Washington, as Abraham Lincoln, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as even Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan, that all of these people, each and every one of them, understood that there was a responsibility that went with this office. And that responsibility was to the entirety of the people of this country to keep them safe, to not threaten them, to not use the office to create harm for Americans, but to use the office to protect Americans from all threats, foreign and domestic. And that is gone now. That is utterly gone. And more than ever, the words of Rabbi Ross are vital. There is nothing more important than we can do now as Jews than to bring the values of Judaism, the values of being able to disagree in public and still love one another, the values of being able to put forward time-honored and cherished traditions and principles and say that applying them requires work, that there is no black and white here, that all attempts to make things into yes or no questions are ideological attempts to simplify that which cannot be simplified. Let's take it out into something totally different. I listened to a conversation with Ezra Klein and an epidemiologist last week. It's actually from a couple of weeks ago. And the epidemiologist was an expert on HIV/AIDS, not an expert on COVID-19. And she said that from her assessment right now, what we are having is a terrible conversation about the nature of risk. That risk is never a binary either or decision. It's always complicated. So for example, I am in my office right now. I do not leave the confines of my closed office without a mask.
All right.
I walked to my office today, the half mile from Northtown Toyota on Millersport Highway. It's not a long walk. I still wore my mask. I didn't need to. I was not at any risk. I could have taken off my mask. In fact, normally when I do that type of walk outside, I don't wear a mask because there was nobody around and I was outside. The risk differential between inside exposure and outside exposure is between 20 and 40 times difference. That to be an inside space without a mask is to increase my risk of being in outside space without a mask by 20 to 40 times. The epidemiologist said, we don't normally talk in risk that way. That when epidemiologists calculate risk, their drastic risk differential is 2 or 3 times the risk, not 20 to 40 times the risk. This is not a controversy. Eating inside in a restaurant, having a beer inside in a restaurant is a absolutely certifiably riskier business. However, sending our kids to school with masks is complicated. Figuring out how to socialize so that nobody goes crazy is complicated. Figuring out how to travel so that grandchildren can see their grandparents is complicated. Figuring out how to keep people safe so that they can go to work is complicated. These are not binary questions. When people are throwing out, it's either this or it's either that, and there are only 2 sides to this debate, we are demeaning the debate. And to think that it only happened last night, it didn't. Look at the words of Rabbi Ross from 2012. We have been headed this way for 50 years, if not for 400 years. We have been headed this way when we put forward the idea that everybody had equal rights, but we didn't really mean it. And so now we have to figure it out, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be complicated. And that is, I think, what Rabbi Ross is saying. He continues here. He says, I wrote All Politics is Religious to my old self of almost a decade ago, back in the days when I sat with that quieter choir and barely raised a peep. Of course, I followed the news and kept informed. I gave money to causes from time to time, and I signed a petition every now and then, but I rarely wrote a letter to an editor or called anyone in Congress. I didn't even know the names of my state representatives. I figured that having strong feelings and all the facts was enough. Reasonable people would recognize that the other side was wrong, and someone else would surely speak up and set things straight. Then I started working as an advocate, and I realized how few people come forward. Like I did, many people expect someone else to speak out, but that someone else thinks the same thing too, with the result that important viewpoints aren't being heard. Other communities own the forum, those opposed to the teaching of evolution in public schools, or those who deny global warming, for instance. Remember, we're still talking about the denial of global warming, and it's 8 years later. Their voices are very clear, forceful, and persuasive. Meanwhile, when it comes to my position, some folks are unaware that I and religious people like me exist. I wrote this book to help those quieter voices become better heard. All Politics is Religion has two parts. The first part of the book identifies and describes the religion in all our great national domestic policy debates. Sometimes the religion is obvious, as in a city council fight over allowing a holiday display in the public square. Sometimes the religion is just below the surface, as when evolution debunkers go to the public school committee to get creation science included in biology curricula. Scratch the surface of those arguments and the religion is right there. Sometimes the politics doesn't look religious at all, be it over the environment, the tax code, or national security, for instance, but sure enough, there's a religious theme at the core. The second part of the book describes new and fresh ways to communicate. With a little help from All Politics is Religious, a person of faith will be better able to enter the national conversation and speak with conviction and respect. You might think that religious leaders already know about communication and have little to learn. Preaching, speaking, and writing are such an important part of religious life, it makes sense to assume that we already have these skills and have no need for building on them. The reality is we have plenty to learn. And this, Michael, is for you. We are back to Buber. So for those of you who don't know, one of the main thrusts of our teaching here at Temple Beth Zion in Buffalo over the last 2 years has been a monthly Martin Buber conversation, which has fallen away as I've started weekly conversations on wide-ranging topics. But I'm looking forward to bringing Martin Buber back, and we may have to go to Rabbi Ross's other book to get into it. So this is religious communication between two of us and among us all. Let's take a look back. All Politics is Religious is the sequel to my last book, God in Our Relationships, Spirituality Between People, from the teachings of Martin Buber. Martin Buber, who lived from 1878 to 1965, set out to explain his Jewish faith to people of all beliefs and backgrounds, writing his classic I and Thou to describe God's presence at the heart of a special kind of human relationship he called I-Thou. So to give us some context here, Martin Buber's theory, dare I say, his mandate, his appeal to all of us, is that there is a way of being in the world that is open to being transformed by every relationship. And that this way starts before I even meet someone. If I'm going to go into a conversation ready to learn something new, ready to encounter a person who is mysterious and miraculous and wondrous and might teach me about myself and the world and God, then I have a different attitude than if I'm going into that conversation with an agenda to accomplish something. Buber identifies these two attitudes as an I-you or I-thou attitude and an I-it attitude. I can approach the world as if it is filled with stuff that I already know, filled with things to accumulate, filled with experiences to tabulate, filled with stuff that I put on my bucket list and check off. Or I can go through the world with wonder, never knowing how it is that the next moment might be a miracle I have not encountered yet, never knowing how my next conversation with a person I know or a person I've never met, with a person I like, or with a person who doesn't click with me, might be the moment where I see something godlike in that person and am reverent for the first time about this new thing. In this way, we hope to transform all interactions between people from I-it, I'm looking to get something from you, to I-you, I treat you as a representative of God, as someone who deserves my deepest respect, and therefore from whom I have the most to learn, an I-you relationship. And this is at the heart of a lot of contemporary Hasidic thinking and Jewish spirituality, and Martin Buber said it quite beautifully in I and Thou, and we might go back to it and talk more about it, if everybody wants, because of course, these conversations are at your discretion. Austrian-born Buber wrote in German for an intellectual audience, making I and Thou a challenging read for many. When Buber fled Nazi Germany to live in Jerusalem, he was asked if he would write in Hebrew. As the story goes, he jokingly responded that he didn't know the Hebrew language well enough to obscure his ideas in it. I don't know the language well enough to hide my ideas. So I and Thou, for the significance of its ideas, never got the full attention it deserved. I wrote in God and Our Relationships to explain Buber's approach in a conversational voice, illustrated with stories and personal experiences. At first glance, it may seem like the spirituality of this I-thou relationship has little to do with political arguments and speaking with the press. After all, I-thou means, as they say, listening with all three ears, listening with our ears and our souls. I-thou pays careful attention to the thoughts and needs of the next person. In contrast, rhetoric, lobbying, and addressing the media mean barely listening with one ear. It is all about selling an idea and getting one's point across, regardless of what the other person thinks. This is Buber's other relationship, the one he calls I-it. This book picks up where God in Our Relationships leaves off. Now, I think all of us know at this point that rhetoric, lobbying, and addressing the media, when done with bombast and the attempt to convince, doesn't convince anyone. And where we are today is recognizing what Rabbi Ross is going to teach us the details of. And those details include the idea that we don't make any progress if we don't start by listening. That first and foremost, I need to understand the people I'm trying to convince of anything. In fact, it's more important for me to listen than it is to convince. Because if we're going to accomplish something together, I need to let down my agenda and listen so that we together can pick up a project and do it together. Because I can't do it by myself. I can only do it with you. And if I am going to do something with you and not for you, then we need to do it together. And if we are going to do it together, then I need to stop telling you what to do and start learning what's important to you. And that is at the core of this new idea of being religious and political. Nonetheless, and we'll see how much I argue with Rabbi Ross here, I-it plays an important role. I-it happens when a customer is nothing more than a number to an account manager, when a student is nothing more than a grade to a teacher, or when an advocate sits down with a state senator and ignores an opposing argument to drive home a point. The I-it relationship can be cold, indifferent, tedious, soulless, even depressing. However, as Buber taught, the I-it is essential. Imagine life without the I-it of the surgeon's steady hand, or the I-it of a bus driver's focus on the road under a sign that reads, "Please do not talk to the driver when in motion." We need the I-it in the businesslike and forceful conversation between the person making the news and the one covering it. We need the blunt lobbying visit that demonstrates sharp difference over a policy matter and the political consequences that follow in the I-it. What I would say, as more of a nuanced reading of this, is that some relationships are less I-you and more I-it because we have to get through the day. So for example, I have a very lovely relationship with the people with whom I dropped off my Toyota 4Runner this morning. So my Toyota is getting serviced at my local Toyota dealer, and I know the guys and the women who service my Toyota pretty well. I sat and I bantered with them for a little while as we were doing our business, meaning I had more than just an I-it relationship with them. I recognized their individuality. I asserted my own individuality. We talked to each other. We joked around. And then I left because their business is my Toyota. And my business is paying them for it. So while I hope all of us participated in having a better conversation and an acknowledgement of each other's humanity, we still have a relationship that's focused around getting something done, not about whether or not we're going to transform each other and learn from each other in that moment. The I-you-ness in the relationship, the I-you essence of that relationship between us at that moment, made it a much more pleasant day, I hope, for all of us. Said, we're in it together. Said, we share in this project. Said, I see you as a person who is doing this and you're not just an employee or a number. And they said, we see you as a customer and we see your car as important to you. And we're going to take care of you. But again, it's all about this range. I could have been difficult. I could have been businesslike. I could have made no effort to make their day better. And in so doing, I also would have made my day less good too. Because the I-it relationship also says something about me and has an impact on me. And I would rather be in I-you moments than I-it moments, not just for the other person, but for me. All right, Rabbi Ross continues. How did I do, Michael, on summing up a lot of I and thou stuff in a short amount of time?
Pretty good, but the one thing that the I-you relationship needs is reciprocity. It doesn't do much good if you're talking I-you to somebody that says, you're just wrong. I don't care what I don't care what the facts are. This is what my facts are my facts and I believe them. That's it. There's no discussion. That's a dead end.
It is a dead end. Well, as I said to someone the other day, I have a right to my feelings and you have a right to your feelings. I don't have a right to make my feelings your problem. I don't have a right to make my facts your facts either.
Well, that's more to the point. I mean,
right. Same thing.
I mean, a Jew trying to talk to a Second World War Nazi about his right to live is not going to get very far.
Well, we've really passed the point of reasonable discussion at that point.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
All right. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? So Rabbi Ross says, I would never claim to know precisely what Buber or any other historical figure would do or say today about the way we live. Yet Buber had a strong commitment to the kind of social vision that this book embraces. Buber opposed capital punishment, even for a convicted Nazi war criminal like Adolf Eichmann. He called for cooperation between the Jews of Israel and their neighbors. He praised the Israeli kibbutz movement for envisioning and establishing a community based on equality. He affirmed the spiritual dimensions of intimate decision-making, which is critical to the most contentious social and religious issues of our time, such as gay rights and access to contraception and abortion care. Buber took the same kind of leap from spirituality to policy that I am taking in turning from my earlier book to this one. And truly, Buber was a major advocate for coexistence in Israel. He and a teacher of mine, a professor of mine when I lived in Israel, Paul Mendesfor, worked together to try to establish a network of sitting together at cafes between Palestinians and Jews. He thought that people needed to meet in informal settings and not just at checkpoints at the end of a gun.
Excuse me.
All politics is religious is about speaking with dignity and respect. All too often these days, political conversations and disagreements lead to angry rhetoric and personal attack. I don't know what he could possibly be talking about. This book would have I thou bubble over into I-it, so to speak. It asks that our political conversations are candid, free of invective, and marked by mutual respect. This is my story, just like God in our relationships is my story. God in our relationships shows what I learned about spirituality in personal conversations. All politics is religious shows what I learned about expressing religious values to the public, the media, and policymakers. Both books explore spirituality, religion, and communication. The most important lesson, speaking with emotion. In the wake of President George W. Bush's victory in 2000, a spirit of self-blame filled the conversations among many supporters of former Vice President Al Gore. We lost because we did poorly with our message. We were busy communicating the facts while others were communicating feelings. We were telling people that we thought they should know instead of stirring emotions that would lead them to do. We thought that having the truth was good enough. While we were correct, the others were passionate. And when people have to choose between passion and intellect, passion wins. There was a call for a new language back then. Words and images eventually put to use in Barack Obama's presidential campaign in 2008. But the nagging questions about communication returned and remain today. All politics is religious provides new words and methods for expressing emotion and faith. Working as an advocate helped me understand how language and ideas stir emotions and prompt action. People are more likely to respond with the heart than with the head. I looked back on my years on the pulpit and recognized truths that went right by me, that when it comes to preaching, for instance, people will remember how they felt when I spoke before remembering the details of what I said. Thanks to my media and advocacy training and work, I realized the importance of paying attention to the emotional, which made me a more effective preacher, writer, and teacher. It's not about how strongly I feel about an issue, it's about picking words that move emotions. And this is so quintessentially true. I don't know how many of you heard my sermons over the High Holy Days. One of the keys to giving a good sermon on the High Holy Days is not just all the texts that I assemble, all the stories that I pull together. It is a presentation that lets all of you know how I feel and how I feel about you. If to read the sermons that I gave is a different experience than to hear me deliver them. To hear me deliver them in this format is a different experience than to hear me deliver them personally. The point of those communications is that I, like Rabbi Ross, I think have been on a journey of learning that I need to convey to you the emotional impact of what we learn together. I need to convey the emotional impact of my learning on me so that you can feel it too, because truly, no one is going to remember the text. We can break down, for example, my 2 Yom Kippur sermons into 2 very simple ideas. I gave you all the opportunity to feel a little bit of how I felt about my grandfather on Kol Nidre as a teaching.
Yes.
And on Yom Kippur morning, I told all of you and showed all of you how I feel about how miraculous it is to be in a community where people care about each other and do for one another. And in that, I shared 2 important feelings and showed all of you, I think, both what I feel inside and what I feel outside and how we all can make each other feel together. The emotions were more important to the majority of people than the intellectual argument. That's not to say that there aren't people who will come to me and say, I like the point you make. There are. However, the majority of us come away from a talk with the feeling of the talk more than the reasoning of the talk. It is often more memorable. Just like if you want to remember something about a time or place, the number one way to do so is to have an aroma that evokes it. We remember smells more emotionally linked, or at least many of us do, than almost anything else. A favorite food, a smell of a flower might take us back to a memory in a more tangible way than almost anything else. Maybe, for some of us. At first, I felt uncomfortable stepping back from the intellect and reaching for the gut. But then I realized that's what the Hebrew Bible sometimes does. The Passion of the Prophets is a great example of emotional expression. So is the drama and suspense of Abraham's selfless and courageous negotiation with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Moses' success in convincing God to back down from imposing harsh punishment after the sin of the golden calf. And what's not said here, what he doesn't say here, which I think is really wonderful and important as well, is Abraham's selfless and courageous negotiation with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah is a setup for our emotional investment in Abraham as someone who argues with God, and then Abraham doesn't argue with God over the life of Isaac in the story of the binding of Isaac that we read just this last week. So here we've got this push and pull. The Bible is constantly asking us to feel, to think and feel at the same time, to raise the questions of how to behave in society with each other and for one another. These stories say, stay with people. Here we are, 4,000 years later, still studying them and learning from them. Religious ideas and language circulated long before there were Democrats, Republicans, or any other party. Faith came first. The Hebrew Bible insisted on a social safety net of caring for the widow, the stranger, and the orphan, ages before anyone thought of criticizing big government for being what it allegedly is. The Bible teaches a powerful and memorable moral message by reaching for emotions through engaging stories, poetry, and more. What worked then works today. This book has everything a choir needs to sing. I wish I could promise that all politics is religious will secure sound public policy. I can't do that. I wish I could promise that it will soften the tone of all the angry political rhetoric. I can't make that promise either. Clearly, it hasn't helped. Or if it's helped, it hasn't solved it. But at the very least, I pray that this book contributes a dignified and respectful religious perspective to the national policy conversations and empowers the faithful to make this world a better place for all. And here, I think, is something that we still need to do. We really still need to get up and figure out a way to say, I am a believing person, and my belief informs my thoughts and my principles, and they are important to bring to bear in the public sphere. That I have something important to say about politics because I am a religious person. All right, his introduction is how I became an advocate. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Nope, okay. You're being very quiet today. After years of working as a congregational rabbi, visiting the sick, leading worship services, and going to plenty of meetings, I made a change. I became a religious advocate for reproductive rights, including sex education, access to contraception, and abortion care, as well as stem cell research and gay rights. While I still enjoy part-time work at a congregation, this book is about religious advocacy and what I learned. I thought that the professional change would be easy. After all, I figured that my new advocacy and media office, even one that jumps on breaking news, couldn't be more demanding than a synagogue with all the pastoral emergencies, funerals, and internal politics. I couldn't imagine that a meeting with a state senator could be a bigger challenge than talking with someone about a life or death medical situation, or sitting down with a bereft family to plan for a funeral. Who would think that speaking at a press conference would be harder than standing in front of a confirmation class and trying to interest a room full of tired but frisky teenagers who had already endured a full day of public school? Plus, I'd be working in Albany, New York, the capital of a progressive state. I expected to spend my time with like-minded clergy from many different faiths, something I have enjoyed doing throughout my congregational career. This job will be a breeze, I thought. By the way, this phrase is always a warning flag for me. We think that the next thing we're going into is something that will be easy because of everything we've done before. It is a sign that we have no idea about the next thing we're going into. In my experience. But I was wrong. The difference was so great, I almost couldn't bridge it. I put my soul into it and learned a thing or two. I learned that we don't have to agree on the issues in order to have a respectful conversation. Yes, I have strong feelings, a religious conviction about things like immigration and healthcare, and I am a strong supporter of church-state separation. I am passionate about reproductive justice, including sex education for teens, making contraception available to those who believe they need it, and ensuring that a woman can get a safe and affordable abortion care when she knows in her heart that she needs it. Religious people come to all kinds of conclusions about these issues. Some I accept and some I don't. My work teaches me the importance of a respectful disagreement and avoiding the strident public rhetoric and personal attacks that threaten the moral fabric of our nation. we can have a dignified conversation no matter where we stand. I learned new skills. Though I was an experienced teacher, preacher, writer, and lecturer, I had to go through plenty of skill building. Even with all the TV news I watched and the magazines and newspapers I read, I endured a gauntlet run of on-camera media trainings and mock interviews. I learned to frame my argument, to use a message triangle, and to stay on point. Though I was already a published author with 2 books to my credit, my writing underwent rigorous and painful edits and re-edits. I realized how writing for print, newspapers, and blogs is very different from writing a eulogy or putting something together for the pulpit for a congregational bulletin. I learned how to drive home my message, all the while stirring up minimal discord in the faith community. It took a year, which felt like a dog year, but I mastered the basics and began earning the trust of a network of professionals in community organizing, government relations, and media within our office, across the state, and eventually nationwide. By the way, I think a lot of the rabbi relearning stuff is part of the problem with the rabbinate in general, which is that rabbis are taught by academics for a non-academic job. I do not teach in a classroom. I do occasionally, but that is not my job. I do not teach students who are coming to get graded by me. And I do not teach for the sake of transmitting material, but for the sake of transforming one another. It's a very different project. And I think rabbinical schools, rabbinical education, often by virtue of the fact that we are seeking intellectual and academic credentials through our rabbinic understanding of the world, and therefore being taught by the best professors that we can find, are cordoned off into a very academic thinking about things, when the job of rabbi is not the job of professor. And thinking that they are alike is often a challenge. So we see that Rabbi Ross had to overcome that. I learned that media and government professionals really care what their stakeholders think. Like many, I used to assume that elected officials weren't interested in our opinions, and I was wrong. They read our mail and tally our emails. For instance, 10 phone calls to a legislator can make a difference, especially on the state, county, or municipal level, particularly when it comes to clergy and voices of faith. It is the same with the media. People joke about the faithful not paying attention when clergy preach. How many stories are there about congregants in the pews falling asleep during sermons? Just don't tell any of those jokes to elected officials and reporters who pay close attention to clergy opinions. Our letters to the editor make it into print. Supportive policymakers become bolder when they hear from us. They speak up and call for a bill's passage. And this is true about everyone. When we write a letter to the editor, when we write a letter to an official, and now more than ever, if you have the time and effort to write a physical letter, it gets attention. Emails do get counted. And I can tell you, our officials are listening to us. If you care about something, and you care about something enough to tell me, Rabbi, Temple Bet Zion needs to take a stand on this issue, I have a state senator who takes my phone calls, who will listen to me, Senator Tim Kennedy, who follows me on Facebook and on Twitter. I can call County Executive Mark Polenkars directly on his mobile number. He and I exchange texts. And that's because we've invested in each other in relationships. I was a new rabbi in town. They wanted to get to know me. I wanted to get to know them. We trust each other to bring good opinions and good thoughts to one another. That trust is something that we as a community can take advantage of. They also trust people who engage with them regularly. Our politicians are not so far from us. We can have an impact on them. Take an assembly member or a senator sponsoring a bill. He or she is committed to doing whatever possible to get the proposal through committee and down to the floor for a vote. They are thrilled when we come forward for them. They have a fight on their hands, even in a blue state like New York, and deeply appreciate clergy support. I am glad to see you, they tell me. We hear from the other side all the time. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. Now, please, please, please go visit my colleagues and ask them to move on that. Next thing you know, several wavering legislators have heard from so many advocates, constituents, community leaders, and clergy they put their names on the bill as sponsors. A weakly committed senator decides to go out on a limb by calling around to ensure that House leadership moves the legislation forward. Legislators break from party pressure and vote according to conscience. Public opinion counts in the media and in state and national capitals, religious opinions in particular. So one of the interesting things here in town, for example, is Crystal Peoples-Stokes, very powerful local politician, but one with whom the Jewish community often aligns, and the religious community that we tend to go with often aligns. So it's very easy for her to feel our support. Senator Kennedy, who is a Democrat, is nonetheless represents a lot of conservative Catholics, and he himself is Catholic. When Senator Kennedy crossed cultural aisles to become supportive on reproductive health, he faced a huge amount of backlash. Every one of our phone calls to him from other constituents who said, "Thank you for taking the risk, thank you for supporting us," made a huge difference in his attitude. He felt better and therefore will feel better about listening to us going forward. Yes.
So, I agree calling, writing these different things to say how I feel about an issue. How is there truly separation of church and state? Because I haven't, maybe it's just me, I don't really see.
So the separation of church and state and this is a good conversation to have before we go forward, and a good one to close on today. What does the First Amendment of the Constitution say?
We the I did not pass go. Is that we the people?
No, I'm going to bring it up for everybody. It's the advantage of working on my computer for this.
Okay.
So the United States Bill of Rights, it's coming up now, because this is important.
I mean, I keep seeing where religion keeps coming more and more into
All right, so the
politics.
Bill of Rights right, but we're talking about two different things here.
Okay.
Here's the First Amendment.
Okay.
This is the entire text of the First Amendment.
Okay.
Right here. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So the First Amendment itself has two primary clauses, one about religion and one about freedom of speech. We are looking at the religion clause, so just the first part. First, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Well, we are not advocating for any of that. That would be the Congress creating an official American religion. We are not engaged in that. Nor shall Congress prohibit the free exercise thereof religion. Now, in order to preserve the separation of church and state, religious communities are given a benefit, namely tax-free status. So, in order for Congress to avoid prohibiting the free exercise of religion, Congress does not tax religious organizations, giving us the freedom to exercise our religion without taxes. However, in order to preserve our tax-free status, we have to not interfere in the life of the state. How is that maintained? Well, that's the wall between church and state. That wall is maintained by me as a representative of Temple Beth Zion endorsing no candidate on behalf of Temple Beth Zion.
Okay.
I do not campaign for any candidate on behalf of Temple Beth Zion. However, I am also an American citizen. And so there is nothing that prohibits me from, as I have right now, having a Biden-Harris lawn sign on my lawn. I do not,
Got it.
I don't have a Biden-Harris sign on the pulpit of Temple Beth Zion
Or on the lawn of it.
or on the lawn of Temple Beth Zion, nor would I advocate for such.
Right.
When I served the congregation Temple Bat Yam in South Lake Tahoe in Carson City, Nevada, I happened to be there during an election year in 2008 that I thought was a particularly important election. For any of you who ever want to get involved in politics, Nevada is a great place to do it. Why? Well, it turns out all of the skill set that Rabbi Ross is talking about translates very easily to the caucus system in Nevada.
Mhm.
So in the in January of 2008, Ginny and I showed up at our neighborhood caucus to caucus on behalf of a very unlikely candidate, namely Barack Obama.
Right. We
And,
did too.
and both of us got selected as our local neighborhood district representatives to our county on behalf of Barack Obama. So we both went to the Democratic County Convention in Douglas County, just south of where Adina and Kurt are, in Douglas County, Nevada. And both of us got elected as county delegates to the state convention. And I almost got elected as a state delegate to the national convention, but did get elected as I got a seat on the Nevada State Democratic Party's executive committee, representing an at-large seat representing the rural counties of Nevada. Now, in order for me to do this, I cleared it with my board of trustees at Temple Bat Yam. I went to them and I said, looks like I may be getting involved in politics. I went to them as soon as I got elected at the local district. And I said, I am going to absolutely bifurcate anything that I say in public as Jonathan Freirich, who happens to be a rabbi on behalf of the Democratic Party or Barack Obama. I set up a new email address. I said, I will never say anything political from the pulpit, politicking. And I will only use time that is not the temple. So I will use vacation time and leisure time for this. And they agreed to it. In order for me to advocate, as I do on many public issues here, and in order for Rabbi Ross to do so, we are taking stands on issues that we can make an argument are supported by Jews because they are in accord with Jewish principles. So for example, two Jews can disagree about almost anything. However, the issues that he's chosen to talk about are issues that have strong support, not just by many, many Jews, but also by his reading of Jewish texts. So reproductive freedom, which is his big deal, which I'm not talking about because I'm not really interested in talking about as issues, has a long tradition in Judaism. Right? He's passionate, he said, about reproductive justice, sex ed, and making contraception available. Now, he can easily make a Jewish case for those issues, and should, after all, he's a rabbi. A rabbi can also make the opposite case for those issues. Adina, your question is valid. We as a Reform, progressive Jewish community regularly take a stand on issues. The Reform movement supports and sustains the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. that takes stands on issues, that educates people on issues, and deliberately does not usually take a stand on political candidates, on partisan politics.
Okay.
However, at certain times, we can say quite clearly that there is a reason for us to take a stand on partisan politics. For example, right now, I can say that we have one candidate for president who is cultivating incredibly dangerous anti-Semitism in our country, and we have one who is not.
Right.
Now, I can say, therefore, it is my position as a Jewish person to support one of these candidates against the other. And I can lay out the facts for all of you. And then I can let you make up your minds. I still would not say that Temple Beth Zion takes the position of one of these candidates. But I have good reason as a rabbi, as a Jewish scholar, to take a position, just not on behalf of my synagogue.
Right. Oh, thank you.
Please.
No, I'm saying thank you and, explaining, because I feel more and more religion is creeping into our politics.
Oh, well, that's happened, and it's happened, and so this is a book from 2012, and Rabbi Ross is in large part saying, hey, there's a liberal religion in politics too. If we were to sum up his point of all this, it's that liberals have a religious stance as well, and that conservatives have been using religion to claim that religion says one thing and one thing only in the political sphere. And Rabbi Ross is saying, no. We have a lot to say, and a lot of it is not what we are not creationists. We believe in evolution.
Right.
And somebody claiming that their religion gets to tell us to not teach science, that's not the rights that we're talking about. And if we want to go back and have this conversation, I had this conversation a couple years ago here on the question of the different views of freedom in America. We as Jews, those of us who are from Jewish backgrounds or affiliated with Jewish communities or interested in Judaism whatsoever, are very attached to the freedom to pursue our religion uninterrupted, right? We don't want anyone to tell us what to do religiously. We're back to the original idea of the First Amendment. There should be no interference on behalf of a government in our religion. There should be no state interference. The state doesn't get to tell me that my kids are going to suffer because they went to Yom Kippur services. I need to have a right to get my kids an excused absence from school on Yom Kippur. That's freedom from state interference, from societal interference in my religious life. I don't have the freedom to impose my religious view on others. And this is identified as religious freedom in the public sphere now. So for example, people say there's a big case. Whether or not somebody has the right to not have their wedding cake made by gay people. It's a whole controversy about gay wedding cakes. I won't buy my wedding. I have a right to have a wedding cake that is made by people who are not gay. These people have no right to sell me wedding cakes. I have a right to employ people who are not of my religion. This is the whole question on contraception and the Affordable Care Act. Mm-hmm. And because they're working for a Catholic organization, even though they're not Catholic, and because Catholics don't believe that people should practice contraception, therefore, I don't have to pay their health insurance that covers their contraception. That's my freedom as a religious person to impose my religious view on somebody else who is not of the same religion.
Right.
And that is a different type of freedom. And Adina, what you are talking about is the hazardous confluence of two different types of freedom. Freedom from and freedom to.
It's a lot to think about.
I wish all of you, God willing, continued freedom from interference in your lives, continued freedom to pursue the lives you lead that don't impose on other people's freedom to do the same. I wish us all, God willing, a better 5781. We really need one. And I thank you so much for joining me today, whether you're on Facebook or in the Zoom meeting, and I look forward to our next conversation. Our next conversation a week from today. Our topic for the next conversation is, let me see if I can pull it up so everybody knows. So I can advertise in advance. Sorry for not having it at my fingertips. Oh, look at that. It's hidden from me.
It'll be a nice surprise.
No. I have it right here. The problem is I know exactly where it is. I just have to get to it. There we go. Wednesday learning in October includes, next week is October 7th. We're going back to the God of Maimonides. So a little bit more theology next week.
Good.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Wonderful to see everybody. Any other questions before we sign off?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Take care. Have a great day.
Thank